All right. How's everybody doing today? What's going on, Justin? So glad you could come in on my very first show, man. This is an honor, man, and I thank you so much for it, brother.
It's an honor to have me on. I appreciate it.
Man, I never really told you this, man, but I really appreciate you more than you probably know, because I first started doing debates and stuff because of you.
Really?
Yeah, I watched you and I watched your channel. I always liked the at the time you were doing the empathetic atheist channel, and I started watching. I became a big fan, and I think I contacted and I got into your group on Facebook, and then we started talking, and then you helped me to with my first debate, live YouTube debate, was because of you. You actually helped me get in touch with Wes, and Wes kind of hooked it up so I could debate with Matt Adams. That was like my first one a few months ago. And ever since then, I've been doing like all these debates, stuff like that. But that was the beginning, and I really appreciate that, man.
You gave me that. I thank you for reaching out to me. I mean, I never knew that I was that impactful. I don't consider myself anybody special. I'm just some guy, jumbling ideas throughout my head.
Another thing I really love about you, bro, is that when I heard your story, because even at first, when I first came across your channel and listened to you, I already liked you all automatically. Like, I just saw the openness of the way you spoke with people, entertained like theists, people of different worldviews than you, was really refreshing to me. But then when I learned about your background, you grew up as a Catholic, you became like a white supremacist at one point. Then you changed those views. You became like an atheist, I guess, over time. I want to get into that a little bit, just to kind of follow your history a little bit. And then now you've converted to Islam, of course. And I tell you, man, I actually respect people, anybody who can be that open-minded to be able to actually act on their convictions. If something really convinces you, that you can actually have that fortitude and emotional strength to let go of your cherished beliefs, that says a lot about you as a person that wants to do what's right. You kind of see a lot of people that maybe see the sense in Christianity, or see the sense in atheism, or see the sense in certain worldviews, but they won't act on it because they have this emotional component that, they just don't want to give up what feels good. I was one of them, so I already know how that feels. It took me a long time to leave my religion.
It's a pride thing. It's definitely human beings naturally do not want to be wrong. Your first instinct is to go for that double down position. Like, oh shit, I don't know. I got to save myself somehow. Like, it's a fight or flight, type of situation. And I am such, and I think it has to do with me being an extrovert. I really could care less what people think about me. It doesn't bother me in the least. Call me a flip-flopper. Call me whatever you want. I really don't care. Like, I mean, I appreciate what people have to say, and I take their opinions into consideration. But what they think about my choices in my life, it doesn't behoove me or bother me in any sense. To think that anybody in the atheist community right now has any hatred towards me because I'm a Muslim, and they think that I'm a pedophile, whatever they want to say. Cool, have at it.
Right. And see, this is the thing that I admire about you, but it's one thing that I strive to do, is to form my worldview based on reasons rather than emotions of wanting to be liked by other people, or peer pressure, or any other sort of emotional reason, like being afraid of God or being afraid of this and that. I used to be a Jehovah's Witness for years, and I was kind of locked into that thing. And what I realized is I had no good sound epistemology, no valid reasons for why I believe what I did. I found that out. And I found it out too many times, over and over and over and over and over. And I just started to look at my epistemology and realize that, you know what, I don't have any really good reasons for why I'm telling other people they should believe what I believe. Because now it's starting to get to the point where I don't really believe it logically. And it led me out of that religion, and it led me into a whole new world of, trying to figure things out, trying to be genuine in my beliefs. And at this point, I'm very agnostic about a lot of metaphysical and ontologies and things like that. I kind of realized that about myself. So the tool that I use to kind of direct my life is to try to use a really good epistemic reason, try to figure out, is this logical and stuff like that. So that's the reason, folks, for my channel, is just to, explore epistemology, try to see, what makes people, and hey, I already know that I may be wrong, and I'm probably wrong about just about everything. There's very few things I think I know to be the case. So I enjoy these conversations, and I like to learn from people.
That's the crisis that Rene Descartes went through. He realized that he probably is wrong about more things that he believes than what he actually knows, and that's why I find epistemology so fundamental to the God question or the God discussion, is because if your epistemology is clouded in any way and you're inconsistent, we're just going to talk past each other. We're never going to get down the same page.
Amen.
So that epistemology, when you start reading the academic literature for epistemology, a Rutledge companion to the Introduction to Epistemology. That's one thing that I've been reading, is going through that. Plus, there's an Oxford Handbook of Epistemology. There's all kinds of different books. I've been watching, different lectures from universities on YouTube, like free lectures that you can watch that go through all these things. And the more you dive into epistemology, the more humbled you are. The more that when you see people making claims like, I know that God exists, or I know that God doesn't exist, you're like, wait a second. Like, I don't know. I have no clue. I don't have the slightest clue on when it comes to a philosophical knowledge. I can psychologically be, sure. But when it comes to a philosophical confirmation, I mean, I don't think anybody's there really with anything except that you're having an experience. That's it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's the one thing that that I've come to realize, is that the only thing I can really be sure about is like Descartes. I think, therefore I am, or I experience, therefore I know I exist.
Yeah.
So though that's kind of the starting point or foundation of my epistemology right there. The rest of it is kind of an inference to the best explanation of things. And hopefully my inference is logical, and it kind of connects the dots and all of that. So let me ask you this. Were you raised in Catholicism? Is that the case?
Yes. So I was raised Catholic. Went to a Catholic school for many different years. So it was a private school. My mom paid a lot of money for me to go there. I went to a elementary school, or a public elementary school and preschool. And then eventually in like first grade or kindergarten or something like that, my teacher kept forgetting my name. And on my report cards, when I'd bring them home, my mom would read my report card and it would say, Robert is doing such a great job in class. And it happened like 3 or 4 times, to where my mom was like, she doesn't even know her own students. So that's what she was like, nope, you're out of here. Let's put you in a school to where I know you're going to get a good education. My dad was raised Catholic. He went to a school with nuns as the teachers, all kinds of stuff. So I was raised in Catholicism, and then eventually, got baptized. I think the same time, I think I was like 12 years old, I got baptized, but I also got the anointment, the christening, whatever they call it. They take the oil and put it on your forehead.
Yep.
Then also baptism, and confession and all that stuff. So
what was it? Were you really conscious? Like, was it a very sincere sort of reason that led you to the baptism at that age, or were you just kind of doing it because your parents or?
Well, one, I went to a school where pretty much everybody else was baptized.
Mm-hmm.
We went to church 3 times a week, and I wasn't able to. I had to sit in my pew and wait for everybody else to go get, the body of Christ. So I feel like it was partially a kind of thing where I was like being left out.
Gotcha.
So I wanted to fit in, and in all honesty, I think that's what that's what I experienced. But I mean, part of it I do believe was sincere. Like, I grew up not knowing that atheists existed, not that people didn't believe in Jesus Christ all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I thought everybody believed in this. There were just some that sent their kids to schools that were more predominant in learning about the religion itself.
Right. So what age were you when you left Catholicism?
I would say I was probably about 16 or 17.
16. All right. And during the time that you were in the church, did you have any sort of like experiences that kind of helped you maintain your faith, so to speak? Or was it sort of just, yeah, I'm a Catholic? Like, for me, like, I was raised like in the Baptist church or whatever, and it didn't mean anything. It was just like a family label or whatever.
Yeah. So I have never in my life, not once, not even in Islam, have had some type of personal experience of some sort. I've never had this, I've been told by people when I was, a Christian, I left Catholicism and moved towards like Christianity, like a Methodist church. And they told me that I was filled with the body or filled with the Holy Spirit, and that I should become a preacher because I'm really comfortable talking to people and blah, 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 blah. And I was filled with the Holy Spirit. So at that time, like, there'd be times where I'd listen to a song about, Jesus or something like that. And, the hairs would stand up on your arm and you're like, that's it. That's the Holy Spirit. And then once I became an atheist and I started listening to like Tool or A Perfect Circle or like Whitechapel, to where it talks about like branding a cross in the priest's forehead. Like, wow, hairs would stand up on my arm. I was like, that's not the Holy Spirit.
That's not the Holy Spirit. Right. Because see, that's kind of what I think is that a lot of what keeps people or really drives people to their religion isn't things like, the fine-tuning argument or the cosmological argument for God or the moral argument or any arguments. I think that people become Christians and become a part of their, religions or churches. It's because of some emotional feeling. Maybe they had some sort of experience that they attribute to their God. And then to help remind them, or because they don't have these experiences every day. And, they use these sort of philosophical arguments. I think these apologists exist so that they help people not feel stupid for their beliefs, because they're really based on their experience or, sadly, in most cases, probably peer pressure. And so these apologists, they come with these sort of arguments kind of to make them feel good about being a Christian. That's been my opinion when I was in church. And even as a witness, Jehovah's Witness, I used to love to hear the arguments that they put forth, because it kind of like, and they even told you, come get, encouragement. You come to the meeting so you can be encouraged, and that was by hearing these arguments to remind you why you're a believer. Because let's face it, reality is kind of cold and can be interpreted as just uncaring and doesn't give a shit about you.
Yeah.
And you need this God to kind of make you feel grounded and cared for. But so what were the reasons, would you say, that you left the Catholic Church? Like, what was it about the Catholic faith that kind of led you out, if that makes sense?
It was strict. And I had some scary experiences. When I was in like second grade, I had a science teacher, and I apparently missed turning in some homework. And I was told that if I didn't get my homework turned in by a certain time, that I would be hung by my tongue over fire and brimstone.
Wow.
So as a second grader, obviously that scared the living shit out of me. And that's when I started, thinking about inching myself out of the Catholic faith. But for the longest time, my mom's been paying all this money to send me to this school, get a good education. I really want to just play with my friends that are in my neighborhood that go to this public school, not this Catholic school, to where I'm wearing these uniforms and I'm doing this. I can still believe in God. I don't think I necessarily need a church to be, to have a relationship with Jesus. And all these things were going through my head. And that was pretty much the reasons why, is because it felt like it was just too much. It felt like there was damage control going on. And when you notice that as a kid in elementary school, when you notice the damage control, that's when things start to get, a little off.
Yeah. So I guess it was kind of a reaction to the strictness and, and then
it was emotional. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
And even once I left, Christianity, because I left Catholicism, went to Christianity and wanted to become a preacher. Like I was like, I can still believe in God. This place over here is way more laid back. Like we hang out and I'm part of the church band. I get to play guitar. And it's so much more laid back and friendly and not as like strict and it's more like, hey, let's sing some happy songs together and praise Jesus. And I'm like, hell yeah, let's do this.
Let's do that. Yeah.
So I did that for a while, and then before when I wanted to become a preacher, I read the Bible and I went through it and found all the crazy ass stories, about the bears mauling, Elisha, and some of the other things, the story of Jephthah, Abraham and Isaac, like these stories. I mean, I've heard Abraham and Isaac, but I've never heard these other stories from the pulpit, and it scared the living daylights out of me. I was like, this isn't my God,
right? And
then once I realized this is really in the Bible. And then I talked to some pastors, and they're like, "This is true." Then I appealed to emotion, and I said, "No, I'm out. Can't do this."
Yeah.
So
I hear you. It's a lot of people sort of have, and I think this speaks to what goes unsaid, is that people already form an idea of what's wrong and what's right in their life, right? And so obviously they feel like their God is going to be the righteous God. That's what they're taught. And so they compare that to their own, their own little barometer. They kind of like say, well, I think this is wrong. And it seems like God does this. So therefore this God is wrong. So it's almost like people do that normally, and then I think that's where, you get your presuppositionalist apologists that'll come in and say, well, how can you judge what's right and wrong? Because, God is the foundation of right and wrong. So you can't put God on trial like that. You're just an imperfect human and you sin and blah, 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 blah. But I think it's something we all do. We unconsciously, so I understand that.
That's what I like about Islam, is that it specifically states in the Quran, pick up the book, try and prove it wrong. I dare you. Like, go for it. We pride logic and reason. Like it literally states, Allah states 2 or 3 different times that I've read so far, and I'm not even through the whole book, multiple times, to where you pride yourself with the logic that was given to you. Use reason. If you don't, the fool is the one who doesn't use reason.
Right. Would you say that's the main thing that kind of attracted you to Islam? Or is there, like, if you had to kind of narrow it down to one particular reason that kind of got you into being interested in looking into Islam, what would you say that would be?
So I would have to appeal to some type of negative, something that it wasn't that appealed me to it. And I can't, and dealing with epistemology, I could totally be wrong. But it does not, as far as I'm concerned, have logical internal contradictions. We were talking before the show about the incarnation. Logical problem of the incarnation, logical problem of the atonement, logical problem of the Trinity, absolute divine simplicity, which that is an argument for some Muslims that do appeal to that. There's certain beliefs, whether it's a Thomistic belief or an unclassical belief of absolute divine simplicity. You can argue against that and have it go down some type of it possibly falls into a modal collapse argument. But like those things, I've never seen that for
Islam.
I've never seen these academic scholars come up with the logical problem of a law. Like I've never seen it.
So to kind of repeat what you said, make sure I understand and the audience understands. So part of the reason, or maybe one of the main reasons that attracted you to Islam was the fact that you didn't see the same sort of contradictions or logical problems that exist in like Christianity. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Not just simply Christianity, but I was shown that every worldview that I investigated, after going through the, Kalam, contingency argument for a will, things like that. I went through those arguments that get you to a general belief in a theistic God. Once you're there, then you use a process of elimination to say, look, let's take a look at the possible religious beliefs that have been presented to me in my life. Let's investigate them, figure out what they believe through an internal critique, and try and find logical contradictions within their own belief system. Get them to say, I believe this, and yes, I believe that also. And then you show this is logically that you can't believe both of these. Well, I do. Okay, well, then this is incoherent. Ball it up, throw it out the window. What's next? Gotcha. So after doing that, I came down to where it was, it was basically just Islam and atheism left. And then that's when, consciousness and all that came into it. And now that wasn't really a logical contradiction of atheism or anything like that, because atheism isn't really a belief system. But some of the key tenets that I held through like determinism and things like that, hard incompatibilism. There were things within those views which are positions that I found necessary to hold as an atheist that just entailed atheism. I couldn't be an atheist without that position. Other people are, but I don't find it to be coherent. So if I had this strict view of what I have to be if I'm an atheist, and then I find logical contradictions within those positions, well, then that position is gone. And if that position is gone, why do I need to be an atheist? Like what holds me to atheism? So Islam so you kind of may not be correct.
Right.
But it was the last thing that was standing that looked coherent.
Gotcha.
So would I be stupid not to be like, well, for right now, until I gather further information, I want to have the most current view that I'm convinced of. And if Islam is the only thing that convinces me as a coherent position, why not take it for right now?
Let me ask you then, could a worldview be internally consistent and still be wrong, in your opinion?
Internally consistent and still be wrong? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. What would you say? Well, is there any? I would say. Well, first, let me ask you how. Since you're kind of admitting that it could be wrong. Things can be internally consistent, be wrong. So how confident? Like you may be familiar with the scale test. I don't know if you want to, if you respect that or not. But
sure. It's Anthony Magnabosco's go-to.
Exactly, and that's what I kind of want to explore. That maybe that's a useful tool to kind of gauge where you're at. Like maybe from 1 to 100, how confident are you? 100 being that you're very, you're closed-minded. 100 being, I already know Islam is true. There's nothing to discuss. 0 being, it's definitely not. I'm closed-minded. It's definitely not true.
I would probably say I'm around like 85% sure that Islam is correct. I still leave that window open because I always want to be open-minded. Now, some people may, some Muslims may be upset with me because of that. But like I said at the beginning of the show, I have my beliefs. I'm going down the path that I'm supposed to go down. If Allah is real and he knows that I am truly open-minded, then he will lead me down the path that I need to go down. I mean, he's the one that, that tips the scales according to the Quran. So I'm open-minded. I do believe that Allah is real. I am convinced that Allah is real and that Muhammad is his messenger, but I still leave that window open to where I could be wrong because I'm a fallible human being. And diving into epistemology really, really humbles a person.
Definitely. Do you have any markers that would lower your confidence?
Any markers that would lower my confidence? Well, for one, finding an internal contradiction within Islam, a logical contradiction through an internal critique. Most of the time when I ask that, I get Muhammad riding around on a flying donkey. Okay. How is that logically contradictory? Well, you mean to tell me you believe in a donkey that flies with wings? Well, I mean, there are mammals that exist that have wings. What's logically contradictory about Allah, a God who can speak things into existence and formulate matter right in front of my eyes? If he can do that definitionally, then what's wrong with a winged Pegasus?
Like, so obviously you didn't start at the flying horse and go from there.
No. Like,
it must have
there's not one single thing in the Quran that convinced me that the Quran in Allah is real. Like, I spent 8 months, and you've been in the groups before with Jake and Abdul Rahman and Sharif and Hatem and the rest of the guys. I have Hanif. He's a panelist on the show, on the EA show. You also have Muhammad Yunus, who's a panelist on the EA show. All these guys, for the first, 7 or 8 months, they didn't speak about Allah at all. Like, it wasn't like Darth Dawkins to where you can't hold a coherent view, therefore you accept Islam. Right. They didn't do that at all. It was, let's get you to this point, and then I pull the thing to where I'm like, okay, well, things that begin to exist, fine, but the universe, and they're like, whoa, we're not even to the universe yet. And then we get there, and then you're like, well, it doesn't have to be a God that's a necessary being. They're like, cool, it doesn't have to be. Let's just stop there for right now. Let's look at this. Could there be a necessary existence? So at no point were they trying to push Allah specifically on me until we started looking at the worldviews and the religions that have been presented to me in my life. And they said, hey, Justin, do you value logic and reason? And should you hold views that are logically impossible? These basically, I saw these other religions and these worldviews as holding a position that I believe in a square circle. I just can't do it. And Islam is the only one. So, I mean, in short, to answer your question, show me a square circle in Islam.
And okay, so given that Islam was totally consistent, as a worldview, and that's your marker to find that inconsistency or something like that. Why should someone be a Muslim? Like, what would be a good reason to become a Muslim, or what was a good reason for you to become a Muslim?
Well, let's appeal to the atheist audience here.
Yeah.
So me and my wife, when I was an atheist, we wanted to possibly, after watching an episode that was had with Objectively Dan, who's a vegan. They were going over some videos, and they said, hey, take a look at some of these. And then me and my wife watched a documentary on farming, on like factory farming. And this isn't something to be, I don't think I'm actually answering your question. I'm just simply saying that halal meat is fantastic because we know that the animals were not mistreated in any way, shape, or form. They were slaughtered in the most humane way, and the meat was much fresher. But that's not a good reason for somebody to take up Islam.
Okay.
So to answer that question, a good reason for somebody to take up Islam is if it makes sense to them. I mean, that's all that I could really say. Does it make sense to you? Or do you truly believe in Allah, and do you want to submit? If you are not sure that you want to submit to God, don't do it.
Right.
Like my wife, I am not pressuring her whatsoever. Actually, just the other night, she wanted to go through these arguments, And we went through these arguments, together outside, having a smoke, just going over things. And the other night, after, a long period of me talking to her, she's at general theism. She doesn't believe God has free will, but she believes in God. She doesn't believe we have free will, but she believes in God. She believes in a general God. So, I mean, the arguments do make sense. They are rational. They're reasonable to believe. But when it dives into like the epistemology is what the real crux of the matter is that can we hold coherent views without a posterior motives? Can we hold coherent views by rational means without empirical evidence?
Why is a worldview that makes sense a reason to believe it? Like, what is could somebody say, I know my worldview doesn't make sense, but it makes me happy, makes me feel good. Is there anything wrong with that?
No, there's not. I mean, if you would like to live your life appealing to a mystery because somebody had brought up some type of contradiction within your worldview, like I know we have John in the chat, Original Win. I love him to death. He shows up to every one of my shows. But he believes in Jesus Christ as God. And I find that to be contradictory. And I know that there's ways that he would try and, attempt to resolve the issues. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody has resolved the issues because these issues are still being brought up. And if they're still being brought up, at least have it in the back of your mind that this is questionable because there is an apparent contradiction. There's something within this belief system that is contradictory. So we need to keep that in mind. And if we appeal to mystery, kind of like we said before the show, then Scott Williams could come up with any God that he wanted to, that he could conjure up in his mind. And as long as he appeals to a Mysterian view, a positive or negative Mysterian view, then that God that the person actually thinks exists in Scott's, artificial God, is that a stalemate?
It's a stalemate. It can't be refuted based on the rules that your opponent is playing by. So I understand that 100%. From where I sit, like, I know that Islam requires, and I don't want to say it requires, and there's a lot of interpretations of what religions require and what, they're about. But it seems to me that it would be more compelling, and I'm just saying this honestly, and this goes for Christians too. The reason to believe in those is to avoid some sort of pain or suffering. Like, even though, hellfire, I don't believe in hellfire. And I was in a little chat with a Muslim about, I guess, 4 weeks ago, and I asked him the same question, like, what's the real reason that I, as an unbeliever, should look into Islam and become a Muslim? And, his answer was to avoid hellfire because, the Muslim hell is, he cited me some scriptures about, or some statements about God's going to put on like a fresh new skin in hell, and then it gets burned off, and he'll keep replenishing me with more skin so that I can suffer. And I got to tell you, if that was true, that would definitely be compelling reasons to be a believer. The only problem I would have with that then would be, well, if God knew I was just saying I believe out of fear, he would know that, and I would still go to hell anyways. I would have to be genuine in my belief. And but if
I don't think that's a problem in Islam. That may very well be a problem in Christianity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and you're only doing it because of fear, then but within Islam is that you are judged based off of your deeds. The type of person that you were on this earth, you don't necessarily, I could never say to you or Katie or anybody in this chat that they are going to hell. It states that the Kafirs will be in Jahannam and will be it will be, you know, the bones of the dead will be fueling the fire, and they will put on their new skin and consistently have their skin burn off and suffering. But that is stated towards kafirs. And I think there's a huge misconception of what a kafir actually is. A kafir is if you, Scott, is if you went through argumentation with me and you were interested in figuring out about Islam, and you found out that, or you were convinced that Allah is real, that Islam is true, and you knew all of the information that you needed to know to be 100% to the T knowledgeable that God in fact does exist. And then once you do that and you know that God exists, you still reject him. You say, I'm still not going to believe in you or worship you. I'm still not going to do the things that you've asked of me, even though I know that you exist. That is a kafir.
So do you think that a being that demands worship is worthy of worship, even if he's all powerful? Morally speaking.
So when it comes to, what do you mean by demands worship?
Yeah, like let's say we came to know Allah was the true God. Let's say you understood that 100%, that was true. And but it seems like if you know he's true, you know his teachings are correct, and then you don't worship Allah, then it seems like there, unless I'm mistaken, that you'll inherit some kind of punishment, you know, that you were describing just now by rejecting Allah after you knew that he was the true God. Would that be accurate?
So the other thing that you have to add in there is, like I said before, have all of the knowledge that you need to have. So you can be convinced that God exists and be like, well, I mean, I'm only going to fast for, 15 days out of this Ramadan instead of the full 30. And you can say, well, I'm not going to do my prayers during the day. Well, I mean, you're still possibly going to heaven, just like the atheist who has not prayed to Allah a single time. Everybody has a chance to get into heaven. Everybody does. And it's all based on the type of person you are in your life. So I don't think that Allah necessarily demands worship. What I would be asking is, demands worship for what? For entrance into salvation? Like, because if it's entrance into salvation, you don't need to worship him. That's not a demand that he makes.
Gotcha.
That's a suggestion that he says, hey, you can get extra brownie points. And this is from my understanding. There may be Muslims that do disagree with me. There may be people in the chat that I've spoken to that have convinced me that do disagree with me. But from what I understand is that we are free human beings that are somehow accountable for our actions. And at the end of the day, Allah is the one who tips the scales. Okay. If we've been screwed over in our life, we get extra brownie points. The other night during Ramadan, I have an alarm that goes off when it was time for me to break my fast. My wife had put a nice hot plate of food right in front of my face. And the 10 minutes prior alarm went off, and then she put the food in front of me, and I just started eating. And then as I was eating, I heard the alarm go off for when I was actually supposed to break my fast. And I'm like, shit.
Oops. Yeah.
But it wasn't intentional.
Right.
Because I'm a revert, and 2, because it wasn't intentional. That's 2 rewards that I get.
Okay.
I actually get rewarded with brownie points on the Day of Judgment for doing things like that unintentionally.
Well, that's a lot better for me. That I actually like that view better than the Christian view, where you're just forgiven for your sins because Jesus died for you. That means that there's no amount of work you can do to top the sacrifice that God gave by dying on the cross. That's what they tell you, right? And that just pretty much spells out to me that it's about belief. That's what gets you to heaven. You could be a serial killer, and if you confess Jesus as your Lord and Savior and ask for forgiveness, well, according to that theology, you're saved. And I think, to me, there's a problem with that, just for me, and it seems like a lot more reasonable to be rewarded for things you actually do.
And also at the same time, like we were talking a little bit before the show, you go into a courtroom and you've killed a family of 4, and they said, hey, guess what? If you take this kid over here who's never done anything wrong in his life, aka sinless, a Jesus who never sinned, take this guy over here. He's never done anything wrong in his life, and we'll sentence him to capital punishment instead of you. You'll be good to go. Would you go through with it? Would you be willing to go through with that? If you're not, then this is a horrible system that's set up. Jesus, if he did die on the cross and went to hell for all of mankind's sins, this is a horribly, in my opinion, and I don't know God's objective morality through and through. There may be a reason, I don't know, but that just doesn't seem fair to me. I feel like
and I mean,
responsible for what we do wrong. Let me be punished for what I've done wrong.
Well, and just to be clear, I saw in the chat that someone says that could be like a more Protestant type of belief system. And honestly, I used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and they did not believe, just your faith declares you righteous. There were works that were involved in that too. So it doesn't reflect all, but it at least the Islamic idea of, your acts, you're going to be rewarded. That seems to be a little more fair than that Protestant view, or that Calvinist, or I don't know if it's Calvinist view, but it's another Christian view that's out there. But, back to belief, in epistemology, like, for example, is there a way that a person could actually, like an unbeliever, could actually test to see if Islam is true or not? For example, like Islam appeals to the supernatural. Can an unbeliever find out if the supernatural is true or not?
So we would have to figure out what they mean by supernatural and what Islam means by supernatural. So, for example, God can speak things into existence. That's just a fact. Within the belief of Islam, that's a fact.
Okay.
Let me just put that out there. I don't want to say that that's a universal fact. Are you absolutely sure about that?
Yeah.
No. So within the belief, God speaks things into existence. When it came to, like, for example, the feeding the 5,000, what is logically contradictory or impossible about matter being formulated in such a way to create more loaves of bread? Obviously, loaves of bread are made from material. That material is components and particles put together. If God can speak these things into existence, or somehow go all around the world or the universe and bring these particles together to create more bread, I mean, it's just now it's a question, the mystery of transportation. Like, it doesn't have to be necessarily like supernatural. Yes, if you're defining it in the sense that it is outside of current scientific observation, like black holes. If you hold to that, black holes are supernatural.
I was about to say,
logic breaks down. You can't explain it.
Anything that that we propose is impossible if you really dig deep enough into the equations of, like, relativity, quantum mechanics. We can always find some way that it can work out, probably, but for most people, a lot of people would say, how can we then know that it actually exists? Not that theoretically it may be able to exist, like, say prayer working. Like, what sort of tests can be run to say that Islam is true?
I don't
say
know.
Like I don't know, and I would have to ask you first. Do you believe that Allah answers prayers, for example?
Yes. So I believe that Allah answers prayers in the sense, and this is unfalsifiable. You cannot falsify this. I believe that Allah answers prayers in the sense that Allah He's omniscient. By omniscient, I mean knowing all true propositions. So that means that God would not know what it feels like to experience things as Scott Williamson. He does not know what that feels like.
Okay.
He does not know how to experience life as Scott Williamson.
Okay.
So he knows all true propositions, and he would answer prayers, but how I as a human would be able to put that in the test tube, I have no clue.
No idea.
I have no clue for it.
So it's just kind of hard to falsify that. Okay, that's fair enough. The other question then that I would ask would be, before you were, your conversion, you were like a material, and I think we talked about this before, you were like a materialist and a hard determinist. Did you, and I think you said that you didn't necessarily drop those particular, or some of those particular views, right? Is that correct?
So I still hold to a more of like a incompatibilist view. Whether I swing more towards libertarian free will or determinism is still up in the air, but I still hold to that free will in a libertarian sense and determinism are incompatible with each other, that you could not be a compatibilist. So I have rejected compatibilism. It comes to the moral responsibility that I'm still fighting with. That I'm still trying to figure out my position.
Yeah, because I guess the next question that would follow that would be, well, if in case you believe that, we don't have free will, then what is the basis of God's judgment upon people?
Say that one more time.
Like if we don't have free will, if we don't have libertarian free will, then what basis is God's judgment? What does God base his judgment on?
Yeah, so that would be one of the things that I'm trying to figure out, because that doesn't make much sense. If you have no free will to be able to make your own personal choices, how could you ever be responsible and suffer the consequences of said choices that you could not have done otherwise?
Right.
Yeah, so I totally understand that. And that's why I'm kind of agnostic about it. I'm going through the Quran. I'm going through more books. Once I get through epistemology, I'm going to try and tackle some more, some more books that speaks more on consciousness, more on free will. I have an Oxford Handbook of Free Will sitting here,
nice.
In my collection, waiting for me to read. So I want to get through epistemology, and then once I get through epistemology, then I'll be able to figure that stuff out.
Okay. Yeah, because one of my questions that I wrote down, I think I've got the answer. But is there anything else so far about the religion of Islam that you have an issue with or question about that, you need answers at this point? Is there anything outstanding besides just free will?
Absolutely. And I want to be extremely clear, because I don't think on previous shows I've been as clear as I need to be about this. And I will say this within all respect of everybody that's in this community, because I am still the exact same person that I was before and have not changed. Within my belief system, homosexuality is a sin. The act of homosexuality, practicing it. Why? I don't understand why. I in my mind as a human being, I'm like, they're just people being happy. That's all that it is people being happy, doing what they like to do. Is it my job to go proselytize to them and try and bring them down and say, hey, you're doing some horrible shit behind closed doors. That's none of my business, but I'm going to make it my business. It's not any of my business what people do behind closed doors.
Right.
I also understand how the community has been shoving, a man and a woman on magazines kissing each other in shows and whatnot down people's throats, while the LGBTQ community has had to suppress it and just suppress it for years and years and years. And now they're finally coming out and expressing themselves. And I would not be obligated to, I wouldn't be prohibited to walk down the street with a pride flag in my hand in the middle of a pride parade. Right. That would be sinful of me to do, But I didn't do that as an atheist.
Right.
I just said, hey, you guys be happy and do what you want to do, which is exactly what I'm doing now. I just have a personal belief that I'm not going to, practice any type of, sodomy of any sort, even with my wife, because that is still under the same law in the Quran. So it's not just men; it's any type of sodomy, even with your wife.
With your wife, right?
So would you class yourself as a liberal liberal Muslim in that sense? Yes. Then,
yes, I'm trying to be as liberal as I possibly can, because I mean those are still the social norms that I grew up in. Well, not grew up in, but that I've changed my views to. I've tried to be as accepting of everybody as I can, because I'm no authority at all. It's not my position to tell people what they need to do with their lives.
And from your position, frequenting with other Muslims, is this something that you found that other Muslims have the same sort of views in this, and are liberal in that sense?
So there are groups that I'm part of on Facebook. There is a Muslim group that's called LGBTQ Muslims that are homosexuals and Muslims. There are trans that are Muslims. There are all kinds of people that are part of the LGBTQ community that still worship Allah, and they have their justifications and reasons for that. And there's also groups that I'm part of are people that aren't necessarily part of the LGBTQ community, but they support the right for people to do what they want, because this is a world where we have free will and they can make their own choices for themselves. So, and I'm by no means, let me be clear about this, I'm not saying that people choose to be gay or choose to be heterosexual or choose, these are preferences that we just are. This is just who we are. I didn't choose to be a straight man. Like, this is just how I was born.
Do you think Islam, up until recently, was more had a hard stance against homosexuality? Like, was the root of it?
Part of that?
Yeah, like back in the days of Muhammad, maybe up till relatively recently. Do you think that homosexuality was considered evil or a sin, or?
I mean, it still is.
It still is, but you said that it's kind of changing a little bit. But so how would you go about resolving that issue if it's something that
resolving it? I don't know how I would resolve it right now, because I don't exactly know where I stand. There is a conversation that I would hope that I would put out if I could somehow in some type of chat. Put a link to a video that I watched recently. It was a 4-hour conversation between a guy named Apostate Prophet. I don't know if you've heard of him before. He's an ex-Muslim YouTuber. And he had a conversation with a guy by the name of Daniel Hakikachu. Now, Daniel Hakikachu is a Muslim who holds some very, very extreme views. He is all for Sharia law. He holds very, very extreme views, and there's a lot of things that I do not agree with him on, positions that he holds that I don't agree with. But the way he argues against liberalism is just fantastic. The roots of liberalism, on how this was a race-based system to where the white man was on top, and that's how everything got started. Like, I couldn't be in support of something that the roots of it are dealt with racism. Like, I don't get that. So, I mean, and he's very well versed in these topics, and just the conversation. Even my wife, when she was an eighth, like, she still, I guess you could still consider her, like, she believes in a general God, but no religion whatsoever. And she doesn't have to change her life at all for that belief that she holds. And she's very, very liberal and very pro LGBTQ, BLM, the whole works. And she was watching this video and she's like, this apostate prophet guy is being so dishonest right now. Like, the Muslim with the crazy views is making really good points.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest everybody try and take a look at that video, and it may open up to how liberalism has kind of forced itself upon the entire world, and
Mm-hmm.
how the people in the Islamic communities that for generations was living under Sharia law, they want Sharia law.
Right.
Like that's what they want. There are some people that want out, and they can get out. They can come to America and do that. Like they're free to do that. And a lot of times with apostasy, that's what happens. You're given 3 days to try and, come back to a law and be like, it was a hiccup. I messed up. My bad. And if not, you're basically said, okay, well, you are damaging to the community, so we're going to exile you out of the land.
Gotcha.
Which I don't exactly agree with that. I mean, but with who am I from a liberal standpoint going to tell people that that's not how you should be? You should do it my way.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally liberal supremacy. Mm-hmm. Just like any other culture, you are a supremacist. You think that your views and your way of life is the best, and you think that everybody should hold that view. Well, I mean, how could you blame another culture for wanting to do the same thing when you're literally doing the same thing?
Well, I get that kind of reminds me of objective morality beliefs that atheists hold, even not just theists. But I was even thinking also that some may argue with you on that based on a genetic fallacy. Like they would say, well, if for example, you would say like some of the roots of progressivism and liberalism has like a really shady past or something like that. Does it necessarily follow that some of the virtues of modern day liberalism, does that make those false? It's kind of like
no, it doesn't make them false.
Right.
That's just one of the many points that he brings up that was eye-opening to me. So it was many different reasons, and then, like I said, it was a 4-hour conversation that these guys had. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. And even like Apostate Prophet had to like pick himself up afterwards. He went through a falling out after this episode. It was that much of a slaying. Even from the atheists, that he lost a lot of followers because they were like, this Daniel guy just tore you apart. And he holds views that neither myself and the other Muslims that I hang out with we agree with. But the points that he was making in his argumentation was just like, I was grabbing my head like 10 different times within the conversation, like, oh my gosh, like I didn't think about it this way.
Yeah. I mean, if you look, I guess if you were to look at any sort of worldview or movement, you can always find some really strange beginnings. Like I know with even talking to a Christian about evolution, they brought up that Darwin was a racist.
Yeah.
How are you going to believe
that evolution's false?
Right. Trying to equate that situation with the falsehood of it, which is a genetic fallacy. But, that's a little bit.
So I wouldn't say dismiss it because of its origins. I would say that its origins is one reason for me to be skeptical about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's with everything. So, but I don't know. I know that part of the reason that really that I've heard you talk about was the Kalam cosmological argument, and I know a lot of people want to kind of delve into that. And I think we were talking one day on chat, and we kind of like held off on it until we can actually do this show. We were talking about, I think you had brought it up even before. I don't know if it was during the show or before, but you brought up that, you can talk to like a naturalist or an atheist that'll say, the cosmological argument, the Kalam, gets you to a cause of everything that begins to exist, but not necessarily God. Can you pick it up from there to say how does it follow that Allah is the God that is true? Or is that something that you could explain in a few minutes even?
Yeah, sure. So If the premises of these arguments are granted, because obviously I don't know if I don't know if you are convinced of the premises. So I basically start with the Kalam, and I'll say that real short. Everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Some would say that I'm committing a black swan fallacy, but we haven't observed. We don't know that. I think most humans would say that man is mortal, even though we haven't observed every single man that's ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
So from our given data that we have to observe, it seems reasonable to say that things that we see that come into existence, that begin to exist, have an explanation or have a cause for its existence. That premise one of the Kalam basically is invoking some type of PSR, or principle of sufficient reason.
Right.
For those that don't know what that is basically that everything has an explanation for itself. So if you hold to some type of PSR, which most people do, that PSR is like a brute fact or a presupposition. So you hold to that presupposition, that PSR, and then everything that begins to exist has a cause. Cool. Then we look at the universe. We see, could this universe be eternal? There's a infinite amount of moments that preceded this moment right now. Would we ever actually get to right now? Logically speaking, this is outside of the scientific realm. So we could never use science to either prove or disprove this. But using logic and reason, we could say it's reasonable to believe this. And this is where the epistemology comes in. And I see a lot of people say, well, we can't prove that. Okay, well, we can't prove what gravity is, but we still hold it at such a high regard. Like the scientific community, it has models that best explain the reality we live in.
Right. There's multiple, even scientists, physicists, kind of hypothesize that there's some sort of cause to the expansion of the universe.
Yeah.
So they it's kind of a reasonable assumption to make based on inference. I mean, it depends a lot on how we're defining universe. That singularity could be encompassed in the universe, so we don't know where the singularity came from, but we can just say that it began to expand. So anything that began to exist, like the expansion of the universe, had some sort of cause. And so you're saying that cause necessarily was God.
But I wouldn't say that right there. So we went through a discussion today where we went through one of Matt Dillahunty's arguments on his Atheist Patreon project, where we talked about the contingency argument, which is where I would pick up. If you've accepted that the universe began to exist, then the universe falls within that box of things that begin to exist having causes, then there would be a cause for that. And that is where the argument ends. I don't care what William Lane Craig says, and we call this thing God. No. Yeah, we do. But you've just skipped so much stuff, and you've just thrown this cringe phrase in here to where an atheist is like, yep, BS, next. No, so don't put that in there. I nor anybody else that I speak to on a theist level would say, and we call this thing God. We would just say there is a cause for the universe. Point blank, period. If you accept that, if that is reasonable to believe, then we're good to go. Then we can move on to the contingency argument, stating that everything that exists within the universe, if it began to exist, including the universe, everything is contingent upon something else for its existence. Now, we already escaped one infinite regress within the universe being eternal. We need to do the exact same thing here. If everything is contingent upon something else, then we just had this infinite regression of things being dependent on other things that preceded it. So eventually there needs to be a first thing. Right. If that first thing didn't have a cause, then it necessarily had to be that first thing. It couldn't be any other way. So within that, if we have things that are contingent and we know that they're contingent, the explanation for all contingent things would necessarily have to be some type of necessary being. Philosophically speaking, being does not mean a deity or some type of agency or anything. We're not anywhere close to that yet. We're simply just saying that whatever this cause was is something that's necessary.
Okay.
You could still at
So,
this point argue that reality is this necessary being. At this point, you could still
right.
argue.
At this point, yeah, you could come up, which would lead to the question, like, how can we come to know what is necessary? Like, what is possible, contingent, essential, and accidental for the variety of entities and kinds of entities that actually exist, that there are, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
How
You
do you
can
think we
find
can
that
come?
you can study the PSR, the multiple different forms of PSRs, and see if you reject those and poke holes in those PSR arguments or
Yeah,
those models. Because if you hold to a PSR, then you hold that everything has an explanation. Everything that's contingent has an explanation. If
yeah,
everything that's contingent has an explanation, eventually, to keep from an infinite regress, if you reject that actual infinites exist within reality, then you would have to have something that is necessary. What other ideas? What other,
right. Exactly. I understand that. And maybe for the audience, just to kind of get these sort of concepts sorted out, how could we not, how do you knowledgeably sort necessary truths from, say, essential truths and contingent truths? How do you sort that out in your own epistemology, would you say?
So necessary truths would be basically like necessary and sufficient conditions, things that would necessarily need to be part of what we're explaining, or for example, like oxygen is a necessary component of fire,
Mm-hmm.
but that does not mean that wherever oxygen is, there's fire.
Mm-hmm.
You can still have oxygen without fire, so that would be a necessary condition for the fire itself.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I just go through and look to see if logically these things are necessary or sufficient, and if I come up with these fundamental principles and it doesn't line up, then I know it's not like a necessary truth or anything like that.
Uh-huh. So yeah, so I would say, well, there's also, essential truths as well, and a lot of people sort of conflate essential truths with necessary truths and
Mhm.
contingent truths, right?
Mhm.
Have you sorted that out, like the between necessary that you just described and say an essential truth or a contingent truth? Because I think I saw a little bit of the where you were are doing a little critique of Matt, his
Yeah.
contingency argument, I think it was. And I was just wondering how do we separate a contingent truth from a necessary truth? Because it seemed like I got the idea that maybe the contingent truths were sort of conflated with necessary truths.
So how would you define a contingent truth?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking. Like a contingent truth is like wood is a human is contingent on being born, for example, but that's also a necessary thing, right?
Mhm.
But
So that ties into the necessary and sufficient conditions.
Yeah.
If you have a table, that table necessarily needs to be made of some type of material. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be wood, unless you're labeling this thing as a wood table. Then that contingent truth would be that it's made of wood. It doesn't have to be wood. It can be metal. It could be steel. It could be plastic.
Okay.
So then that's how you're able to separate those sufficient
Okay.
and
So
necessary conditions.
basically, just to get this clear, you're basically saying that essence cannot be defined in terms of necessity, basically.
If I'm understanding you correct, I would agree.
Okay. So this kind of leads to a question. Well, I think you've already answered that, but are there any limits to modal knowledge in your opinion?
Limits to modal knowledge. I really think for a human being, there's limits to really any kind of knowledge that we think that we hold. Through the studies of epistemology, it's really shown me that we can't be, in a philosophical sense, sure of really anything except our own experience. So I don't think there's any absolute truths within like modal knowledge to be like absolutely 100% have 100% confirmation.
Right. Okay. Well, that's refreshing to know because, as you well know, this is a fact that a lot of theists thrive on 100% certainty about their beliefs. They feel like, we can't be wrong about our knowledge. Even these modal type of arguments in epistemology, they feel like, we know God exists, especially with precepts like Darth Dawkins, people like that, So that's interesting. So, I mean, do you have anything you want to share before we close out? Like any sort of subject you wanted to kind of put out there, or anything you wanted to advertise that's coming up, or anything like that?
Sure. So, if you used to watch the show, and now that I'm a Muslim, you no longer watch it, I would invite you back to watch the show again. I have a call-in show to where I would like a lot more atheists to be able to call in. It's a respectable show. I've been getting a couple guys on there. Like today, we had a guy on named Mike Brigandi, and he's called in just about every single week. And today, he basically said that energy is the only thing that exists, that particles is just a label, and Scott is just a label. So essentially, his argument broke down to where nothing exists except energy. Like, you don't even exist as a person. He said that everything is necessary and there's not anything in this universe that's contingent. To where I was like, can we please just end the call and move on to somebody else? Because this guy is like obviously ludicrous.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would invite people to come and take a look at the show. It still talks to people about what they believe and why. We go over a subject matter for a half hour to an hour, and then we open up the lines for people to call in and present their ideas or present their contentions or arguments, things like that. And I typically, when it comes to non-Muslims, they get front-loaded in front of the other Muslims because we want to have those conversations with the people that disagree with us. I cannot stand an echo chamber.
Right.
I hate it. I hate an echo chamber. So I want that pushback because I'm still, as you've heard tonight, 85% sure. And I'm still going through all these arguments, trying to find where I sit in the world of Islam. Please show up. Give me, like, this is probably the 8th show that I've been on where there's a predominantly an atheist crowd, and I keep telling everybody, reach out to me personally, even publicly in a group, so there's other people that notice it, and provide the logical contradiction through an internal critique of Islam. Like, if it's that easily dismissed, then please just show me where I'm wrong, and I'll change.
Right.
Like, hands down.
Right.
But
Awesome,
8 or 9 shows, or 7 or 8 shows, I haven't gotten anything from anybody, which is kind of expected. But I'm still wanting that. I'm still open. If I'm wrong, I want to be right. And I think I've presented myself in the past as somebody who, when they're shown to be wrong, they stop being wrong.
Well, I think you're on the right track to figuring that out if it exists, because the fact that you're willing to admit that you're 85% confident, there's a little bit of a gap there to full confidence. So that's a start. And I think you would admit that it's possible that Islam could be false, and you just want to know what those possibilities are and whether whether you can make a reasonable inference from that Islam is false. So I think that says a lot about you as a person. Like I said before, you've changed your mind a number of times, extremely so. And that just means that you're willing to search for truth and search for what the truth is. And I admire that, actually.
So there was a question in the chat. James SC wanted to know what time. So every Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern time is when we hold the show. Coming up here soon, I'm getting a scholar to actually come on and present an issue that I know a lot of you atheists have with Islam. We're going to be going over a subject of the age of the Prophet's wife, Aisha. when she was married at 6 and consummated at 9. There's multiple different views, which we will present, and we will actually have an expert in the Hadith in the Quran to come on and explain those things. So please reach out to us. Next week, I'm actually having a Muslim on named Jamie Turner. He is an academic, and I think things are going to get a little disagreeable. He believes that if we look at this pencil, and I don't automatically think God and conclude God from looking at this pencil, or a litter box filled with cat crap. If I don't look at that and automatically, without even reasoning or thinking, just conclude God, that there's something messed up with our fitra, which the fitra is our internal compass that points us towards truth. He says if you don't do that, if you don't already conclude God, then there's your fitra is clouded. Yeah. And I came to this by simply rational means. I don't look at this pencil and think God. I look at this pencil and think wood and lead. Where'd that come from? And then I reason my way to, okay, God created, the ability for this pencil to come about. But that's through a process of reasoning. So he's coming on next week on the 5th, and we're going to be discussing his paper, one of his papers that he wrote on the Fitra.
Well, that's awesome. I think that would be a show where folks can kind of get more into the weeds with a lot of the beliefs and things of that nature. My show, I just wanted to ask very simple epistemic sort of questions that are general rather than get really deep into the weeds, because that's just not the format for what I'm trying to do here. But it sounds like your show would be a good place for someone like the One Good Reason. He's asking a lot of good questions regarding your beliefs. Maybe he can call into your show and address those, and and go from there with stuff like that. But yeah, I just wanted to get a real general overview to start off with you, and just kind of understand how you go from point A to point B just in a very simple way without too much. But I thank you for coming through on that.
Yeah,
I really
thanks for having me.
It's my first show, and hopefully we'll keep it up.
I appreciate what you said in the beginning. I'm glad that I inspired you to do what you do. I don't think I'm that special. I don't think, but I'm glad that I did something for somebody. That my point is to try and make the world a better place, and I feel like the more people that are debating these topics fruitfully and using more logic and reason, the more people we have like that, I think the better this world will be.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just a little humor. I think an atheist asked me today to ask you, is Allah, did the Big Bang come from Allah because he committed suicide? What's up with that?
Oh my God. Oh yeah. So I would be a deist at that point, and I don't know. So I already reject that.
All right.
if God is the causal principle, and he is in fact upheld by logic is a necessary attribute of God. God could never choose to not exist. He's not free to do that. He is the necessary eternal being. So to say that the necessary eternal being can choose to not exist is contradictory.
He's not all powerful if he can destroy himself.
There have been Christians that say you can't limit God. He can do whatever he wants. If he wants to make a square circle, he can. I said, can God choose to kill himself?
Right.
They said, of course, God can do whatever he wants. Like, okay, so your eternal being is eternal and not eternal simultaneously.
Exactly. Yeah, I had that same conversation not long ago with a religious person. But yeah, the interesting stuff, man. It's so refreshing to hear your view and where you're at in your exploration of everything, man. I think hopefully I asked a lot of good questions that people wanted answers to. I'm hoping that's the case. But Katie, are you still there? Do you have anything you wanted to ask?
Still here, yeah.
All right.
Before we close up, I'd just like to say, it's been a great show. I've sat out for most of it just listening. I like the format that you've got going here for this new show, Scott, and I think there's people in the chat as well that also like the format that you've chosen. and we just hope to see some more great episodes coming out in the future. And obviously, I'd like to say thank you, to you as well for choosing to have your show on my channel, which is it's just really great for me as well. So thank you very much for that, helping me out that way.
Yep. Thanks, Khalil.
Yeah,
man.
And it's been great as well listening to you as well, Khalil. Hearing your side of all of this. Obviously, it's there's been a lot of rifts in the community. With the decision that you made, but I, for one, I'd just like to say that I respect your decision. I'm all about freedom, and you get to choose your own path and your own journey. And it's great to see that you've done that.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, I guess that's gonna wrap the show up, man. Thanks for everybody for checking us out, checking me out, and supporting me on this first show. And hopefully I'll keep getting some interesting, high-quality guests like Khalil, and we'll just go from here, man.
Yeah. Have you got yourself a closing statement, Scott, like a closing slogan or something snappy like that? Or
not yet, not really.
We're gonna have to work on that.
Bye, guys.
You can take my old one.
What's that one?
Stay home, stay safe, and let's make America secular again.
Yeah, make America secular again. There you go.
I was told by somebody that what I need to do is now say stay home, stay safe, and let's make America Sharia again. But I'm like, no.
Well, was America ever Sharia in the first place?
Right.
No, it wasn't, and that's one of the contentions.
That's the whole point.
I can't say.
Let's make it puritanical again.
Yeah.
Okay then. Well, we'll close it up. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining in, and catch you later. Good night.
All right. Good night.